A Luftwaffe airfield deep inside Germany, 1944. A German fighter pilot climbed up into the cockpit of an American bomber, and his hands were not quite steady. He had spent the better part of a year trying to kill this exact machine. He had thrown his fighter head-on into formations of these bombers, watched friends die attacking them, and felt his own aircraft shake as their gunners reached out and tried to swat him from the sky. The B-17, the Flying Fortress. The enemy called it that, and the German pilots had always thought the name was arrogance, a piece of American boasting. Now one of them sat before him, a captured one, shot down, repaired, painted with German crosses, and made to fly again so that men like him could learn its secrets. And he had been given the chance to do the thing no fighter pilot ever got to do. To climb inside the enemy, to sit in the gunner's seats, to fly the machine he had been trying to destroy, and to understand it from the inside. He settled into the pilot's seat, looked around at the armor, the guns, the sheer size of the thing, and felt the confidence drain out of him. Because he was beginning to understand something that the men who sent him up to fight these bombers had never quite told him. He had not been attacking a mere airplane. He had been throwing himself again and again at a fortress, and behind this one fortress, he knew, were thousands more, coming in daylight, taking everything he could give them, and never ever stopping. Before I get into it, a little backstory. My dad fought in the Second World War, and growing up, he told me stories about it all the time. And the more I listened, the more one thing fascinated me. Not what our side did, but what it looked like from the other side. The men who were supposed to win, what they saw, what they were told, and the moment they realized none of it was true. So that's how I like to tell these stories, through the eyes of the enemy who couldn't stop us. And now here I am, passing on the stories I learned to you. To understand the fear in that captured cockpit, you have to understand the nightmare that had been unfolding over Germany. By 1943, the Americans had begun to do something that even their own allies thought was madness. They were going to bomb Germany in broad daylight. The British had tried daylight bombing early in the war, been slaughtered, and switched to bombing at night, hiding in the dark. The Americans looked at that and decided to do the opposite. They would come in daylight when they could see their targets and bomb them with precision, and they would protect themselves not with darkness, but with sheer defensive firepower and numbers. It sounded suicidal, and for a long time it very nearly was. The weapon that made it possible was the B-17, and to understand why it terrified German fighter pilots, you have to understand that it was not built like a German bomber at all. Germany's bombers were medium machines, smaller, faster, lightly armed, designed to dart in, drop their loads, and run. They were never meant to fly deep into enemy territory in daylight and fight their way through. The B-17 was built for exactly that. It bristled with heavy machine guns, up to 13 of them, pointing in every direction, above and below and to each side and forward and back, so that no matter where a fighter tried to attack from, at least one gun, and usually several, could reach him. Its crew sat behind armor plate. Its fuel tanks sealed their own bullet holes, and its structure was so rugged that crews flew them home with entire engines gone, with great holes torn through the wings and fuselage, with pieces of the tail shot away. Machines that by every rule should have fallen out of the sky and instead came limping back to England to be patched up and sent out again. But a single flying fortress, terrifying as it was not the real horror. The horror was what the Americans did with hundreds of them at once. They flew in what they called the combat box, not a loose gaggle, but a tight, disciplined formation, dozens of bombers stacked at different heights, deliberately arranged so that every bomber's guns covered the bombers around it. A German fighter attacking one bomber in that box was not facing that bomber's guns. He was facing the guns of a dozen bombers all at once, a wall of heavy machine gun fire hanging in the sky, thousands of rounds a minute reaching out to meet him from every angle. To attack the box, our pilot had to fly his fighter directly into that storm, close the range while the tracers streamed past his canopy, fire for the few seconds he had, and break away before the massed guns tore him apart. Many did not break away in time. The German pilots were not cowards, and they were not fools. They studied the box and found its weaknesses. Early on, the bombers had less firepower pointing directly forward, so the German aces learned to attack head-on, flying straight at the front of the formation at a combined speed that gave both sides only a heartbeat to fire. It took nerves that are hard to imagine, closing head-on with a fortress at hundreds of miles an hour, firing and flashing past with feet to spare. It worked, sometimes. German fighters shot down American bombers by the hundreds. On some terrible raids, the Americans lost so many bombers that the daylight campaign itself seemed on the edge of collapse. There were days the German pilots came home believing they had won, that the Americans could not possibly keep sending their bombers into a slaughter like this. And that was the belief that the captured fortress, sitting on that German airfield, quietly destroyed. The Germans had recovered a number of these bombers that had come down more or less intact, and they did the sensible thing. They repaired them, painted them in German markings, and flew them. They toured them around to their own fighter squadrons so that the pilots who had to attack these machines could see them up close, sit in them, and learn exactly where they were vulnerable. And every pilot who climbed inside one came away changed, because from the inside, the thing told a story that no gun camera film ever could. Our pilot ran his hands over it and understood. He saw the armor plate that protected the crew and thought of his own fighter, where a single well-aimed burst could kill him instantly. He saw the fuel tanks built to seal themselves when hit and remembered how many aircraft he had watched simply explode from one lucky strike. He counted the gun positions, so many of them each with a man and a heavy machine gun and a clear field of fire, and finally understood why attacking these formations felt like flying into a swarm. He looked at the massive, overbuilt structure, the spars and the skin, and understood how these machines kept flying with damage that would have folded any aircraft he had ever known. This was not a bomber the way Germany understood bombers. This was a flying fortress in the most literal sense, a machine designed from the first rivet to be shot at, to be hit, and to survive and come back and do it again. And then came the thought that took the strength out of his legs. He was sitting in one, and he had seen the sky over Germany fill with them, hundreds at a time, box after box marching across the country in broad daylight, each one this tough, this well-defended, this hard to kill. He could fly the perfect attack, close head-on through the wall of fire, put his rounds exactly where they needed to go, and destroy one at terrible risk to himself. And it would not matter, because there were 999 more behind it. And behind those were the factories in America turning out new ones faster than the entire German Air Force could shoot him down. He remembered the raids where the Germans had inflicted staggering losses, where whole groups of American bombers had been shot to pieces, and how, for a moment, it had felt like victory. And now, sitting in the captured fortress, he understood why those victories had led nowhere. The Americans had absorbed those losses, terrible as they were, and simply built more bombers, trained more crews, and come back. They could afford a slaughter. Germany could not afford to keep providing one, because every fighter and every irreplaceable veteran pilot that Germany lost fighting the bombers was gone, while the American stream only grew wider. And then came the final blow, the one that finished the German fighter arm for good. For a long time, the American bombers had flown deep into Germany with no fighters to protect them, because no fighter had the range to escort them all the way and back. The Germans had learned to wait until the escorts turned for home, and then fall on the naked bombers. But in early 1944, the Americans solved that problem too, with a long-range fighter that could escort the bombers all the way to the target and all the way home, and roam the skies of Germany, hunting the German fighters wherever they rose to fight. Now when our pilot climbed to attack the boxes, he was not just facing a wall of fire from the bombers. He was being hunted in his own sky by swarms of escort fighters that had come along for exactly that purpose. The Luftwaffe was forced to send up its fighters to defend the homeland, and in doing so, it was ground into nothing, its veterans killed faster than new pilots could be trained, until the German skies belonged to the enemy. That was the whole war, written in aluminum and machine gun fire, and our pilot could read all of it from the seat of the captured fortress. The German had built a superb fighter and trained superb pilots, and man for man, in a duel, he was often the better airman. And it did not save him, because the enemy had not sent one plane or one pilot to be dueled. The enemy had sent a system, a machine of thousands of tough, overbuilt, heavily armed bombers, crewed by ordinary young men, protected by clouds of escort fighters, backed by an industry that could replace any loss and outproduce any victory, coming in daylight over and over until there was simply nothing left of the German Air Force to stop them. There is a terrible honesty in that captured cockpit. The German pilot had spent the war believing he was fighting airplanes. Sitting inside the enemy's fortress, running his hands over the armor and the guns and the self-sealing tanks and the brutal, unglamorous strength of it, he finally understood the truth his own commanders had never dared to say plainly. He had never been fighting airplanes at all. He had been fighting a nation, one that had decided to win the air not with the most elegant fighter, but with an endless, unbreakable tide of flying fortresses that could take everything he had and keep coming. He climbed down from the captured B-17 that day knowing something he could not unknow. The daylight sky over his own country was already lost, and it had been lost not to braver men or better pilots, but to a machine his nation could never match and never even fully understood until one of them was sitting, silent and captured, on a German airfield telling its secrets to the men it had already beaten.